The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty streets of Fort McDowell, Arizona Territory, as Madeline Everett smoothed the wrinkles from her skirt and tried to ignore the whispers that followed her like faithful dogs. At 35 years of age, Madeline had long since made peace with her unmarried status. Or so she told herself as she walked with her head held high past the mercantile, where three young women barely out of their teens tittered behind lace handkerchiefs. "Poor Madeline," one whispered, not bothering to lower her voice. "My mama says she'll die an old maid now for certain." It was 1887, and Fort McDowell had grown from a military outpost to a small but thriving community where everyone knew everyone else's business, especially that of the town's schoolteacher, who had the audacity to remain unwed past 30. Madeline clutched her lesson plans tighter against her chest and quickened her pace toward the schoolhouse. 12 years, she had taught the children of Fort McDowell, watching them grow, marry, and start families of their own. Some of her former students now had children of their own in her classroom. Time had moved forward for everyone but her, it seemed. "Miss Everett," called Mrs. Whitley from the doorway of her boarding house. "A moment, please." Madeline paused, turning toward the plump woman who had been her landlady for nearly a decade. "Good morning, Mrs. Whitley. Is something wrong?" "Not wrong, precisely," the older woman said, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "But the new man arrived on yesterday's stagecoach and has taken the room across from yours. I thought you should know before you encountered him in the hallway and got a fright." "How considerate," Madeline replied, trying to keep the dry tone from her voice. Heaven forbid she might encounter a man in the hallway of her own boarding house without proper warning. "May I ask who this gentleman is?" "A Mr. Preston Ingram," Mrs. Whitley said, her eyes bright with gossip. "A cattleman from Texas by his account, quite handsome if a bit weathered. Cannot be much older than 40, I'd wager." "How fascinating," Madeline said without enthusiasm. "If you'll excuse me, Mrs. Whitley, I must prepare for my students." As she continued toward the schoolhouse, Madeline reflected on the irony of her situation. When she'd first arrived in Fort McDowell as a young woman of 23, fresh-faced and full of ideals about education on the frontier, she'd had no shortage of suitors. But she'd been determined to establish herself as a teacher first, believing there would be time for marriage later. Later had never come. One by one, the eligible men of Fort McDowell had married younger, more amenable women, until Madeline found herself attending wedding after wedding as a guest rather than a bride. The schoolhouse bell rang clear across the town as Madeline unlocked the door and stepped inside. The familiar smell of chalk dust and wood polish welcomed her, and she smiled despite herself. This was her domain, the place where she was respected and valued for her mind rather than judged for her marital status. By midday, Madeline had nearly forgotten the morning's reminders of her spinsterhood. She was deep into a geography lesson with her older students when the schoolhouse door swung open, flooding the room with bright sunlight and framing a tall, broad-shouldered silhouette. "Pardon the interruption," said a deep voice with a hint of Texas drawl. "Might I have a word with the teacher?" 24 pairs of curious eyes swiveled from the stranger to Madeline, who straightened her spine and approached the door with as much dignity as she could muster. "I am Miss Everett, the teacher," she said crisply. "How may I help you, sir?" The man stepped into the schoolhouse, removing his hat to reveal thick dark hair streaked with silver at the temples. His face was indeed weathered as Mrs. Whitley had described, tanned and lined from years in the sun, but his eyes were a startling blue against his bronzed skin. "Preston Ingram, madam," he said with a slight bow of his head. "I've just purchased the old Thompson Ranch outside of town and was hoping to enroll my nephew in your school. Madeline blinked in surprise. Your nephew? Yes, madam. Billy's 12 and has been living with me since my sister passed last winter. We've been moving around a bit, but I aim to put down roots here. The boy needs schooling and stability. Something in his straightforward manner caught Madeline off guard. Most men in town spoke to her with either condescension or awkward formality, as if her unmarried status made her either pitiable or dangerous. Of course, she said, recovering her composure. We welcome all children seeking an education. When would you like him to start? Tomorrow, if that suits. We're still getting settled at the ranch, but Billy's eager to meet other youngsters. Been just him and me for too long. Madeline nodded. Tomorrow would be fine, Mr. Ingram. Please have him here by 8 o'clock with whatever books he may have from his previous schooling. Preston Ingram settled his hat back on his head, his blue eyes crinkling at the corners as he smiled. Much obliged, Miss Everett. I'll have him here prompt at 8. He turned to leave, then paused. You know, I believe we're neighbors of a sort. Mrs. Whitley mentioned you reside at her boarding house as well. Yes, temporarily, Madeline lied, not wishing to admit she had lived at the boarding house for years with no prospects of her own home, until more permanent arrangements can be made. Something like amusement flickered across his face. Of course. Well then, neighbor, I look forward to seeing you again. After he left, the classroom erupted into whispers until Madeline clapped her hands sharply. That will be quite enough. Back to our lesson. Sarah, please point out the Mississippi River on our map. That evening, as Madeline returned to the boarding house, she found herself unaccountably nervous about the possibility of encountering Preston Ingram in the hallway. She scolded herself for such schoolgirl foolishness. She was a grown woman, not some simpering miss, and he was simply the uncle of a new student. But when she entered the dining room for the evening meal, she couldn't help but notice how conversation faltered as Preston Ingram stood politely at her entrance, pulling out an empty chair beside his own. Miss Everett, would you care to join us? He asked, his deep voice carrying across the suddenly quiet room. Madeline hesitated, aware of the curious gazes of the other boarders. Mrs. Whitley watched with barely concealed glee while Mr. Peterson, the bank clerk, frowned slightly. Thank you, Mr. Ingram, she said finally, crossing to take the offered seat. Please call me Preston, he said as he seated himself beside her. Mr. Ingram makes me feel like my father. Then you must call me Madeline, she replied, then immediately wondered if she had been too forward. It had been so long since she'd engaged in this sort of social dance. Madeline, he repeated, as if testing the sound of her name. It suits you. Mrs. Whitley beamed from across the table as she passed a platter of roast beef. Mr. Ingram was just telling us about his plans for the Thompson place. Quite ambitious, aren't they? Preston nodded, serving Madeline before himself in a gesture that seemed natural rather than performative. The land's been neglected, but it's good grazing country. I've got a small herd coming up from Texas next month, and I'll build from there. A cattleman with vision, Mrs. Whitley said approvingly. We need more men like you in Fort McDowell. Don't you agree, Madeline? Madeline felt heat rise to her cheeks. Mrs. Whitley's matchmaking was about as subtle as a charging bull. I'm sure Mr. Ingram's business acumen will be an asset to the community, she said diplomatically. Speaking of the community, Preston said, smoothly changing the subject. I was hoping you might tell me a bit more about the school, Madeline. Billy's education has been somewhat interrupted by our circumstances. Grateful for the shift to professional ground, Madeline spent the remainder of the meal discussing education and her teaching philosophy. Preston listened with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions that revealed an unexpected value for learning. Most men see schooling as a necessary inconvenience before boys can do real work, she observed as they finished their apple cobbler. Preston's expression turned serious. My father thought that way. Pulled me out of school at 13 to work the ranch full-time. I've spent years educating myself since, but I still feel the lack. Won't have Billy handicapped the same way. There was something in his candor that touched her. No pretense, no posturing, just honest reflection. As the meal concluded, Preston offered to walk Madeline up the stairs to their respective rooms. At her door, he paused. I enjoyed our conversation, Madeline. It's rare to find someone who speaks their mind so clearly. Some would call it a failing in a woman, she said with a small smile. Then some are fools, he replied simply. Good night. As Madeline prepared for bed, she found herself replaying their conversation. It had been a long time since anyone had valued her opinions as more than the quaint notions of the town's old-maid schoolteacher. The following morning, true to his word, Preston arrived at the schoolhouse with Billy in tow. The boy was tall for 12, with a serious expression and his uncle's blue eyes. He clutched a well-worn arithmetic book and stood straight as Preston introduced him. Billy, this is Miss Everett. She'll be your teacher from now on. The boy nodded solemnly. Pleased to meet you, madam. Welcome to our school, Billy, Madeline said warmly. You may take the empty desk by the window. We're just about to begin our history lesson. Preston squeezed his nephew's shoulder. Mind your manners and your studies. I'll be back at 4 to walk you home. After Preston left, Madeline integrated Billy into the day's lessons. The boy was bright but had obvious gaps in his education. During the lunch hour, while the other children played outside, Billy approached her desk. Miss Everett, Uncle Preston says I should ask for extra help if I need it. Madeline smiled, impressed by the boy's initiative. That's very wise of your uncle. What are you finding difficult? The fractions, Billy admitted. And some of the reading. The words get mixed up sometimes. Over the next hour, Madeline discovered that Billy struggled with what she recognized as a reading difficulty she'd seen in other students. Rather than lacking intelligence, he simply processed written language differently. She devised an alternative approach that seemed to help him immediately. When Preston returned that afternoon, Madeline asked him to stay a moment after the other children had departed. Billy is a very capable student, she began, but he has some specific challenges with reading that require a different approach. Preston frowned. His previous teacher said he was slow. I never believed it. The boy's quick as a whip with ranch work and figures. He's far from slow, Madeline assured him. His mind simply works differently with written words. With proper instruction, he'll overcome these obstacles. Relief washed over Preston's face. What can I do to help him? I'd like to work with him after school 3 days a week, Madeline suggested. And if you could raid with him in the evenings, I'll do whatever it takes, Preston interrupted. Though I should warn you, my own reading isn't as smooth as it might be. Madeline considered this. Perhaps we could work together on this. I could show you how to help him most effectively. Something flickered in Preston's eyes, vulnerability quickly masked. I'd be in your debt, Madeline. And so began a new routine. 3 afternoons a week, Preston would return to the schoolhouse at 4, and together they would work with Billy until 5. Sometimes, when the weather was fair, they would walk back to town together, Preston leading his horse while Madeline pointed out local plants and their uses. Or Billy shared stories of life on previous ranches. Madeline found herself looking forward to these sessions with unexpected eagerness. Preston was a patient learner and an attentive uncle, never showing frustration when Billy struggled. And Billy himself blossomed under their combined attention, making steady progress that filled Madeline with professional pride. 2 weeks into this arrangement, as they walked back to town, Billy ran ahead to examine a hawk's nest, leaving Madeline and Preston momentarily alone on the dusty road. "He's thriving with you," Preston said quietly. "I haven't seen him this confident since before my sister passed." "He's a remarkable boy," Madeline replied. "You're doing a fine job raising him." Preston shook his head. "I'm making it up as I go along. Never thought I'd be responsible for a child at my age. How old are you, if you don't mind my asking?" 42 next month," he said with a rueful smile. "Ancient by some standards, I suppose." "Hardly ancient," Madeline scoffed. "Though by Fort McDowell standards I'm practically 1 foot in the grave at 35. Preston looked at her in surprise. 35? I would have guessed younger." "Now you're just being kind," she said, but couldn't help feeling pleased. Not kind. Honest. His gaze held hers for a moment too long before Billy called for them to look at something he'd found. The following Sunday, after church services, Mrs. Peterson, the banker's wife and self-appointed social arbiter of Fort McDowell, cornered Madeline outside the church. "My dear Miss Everett," she began in honeyed tones that immediately put Madeline on guard. "Several of us have noticed your special attention to the Ingram boy." "Billy requires some additional instruction," Madeline replied evenly, "as do several other students from time to time." "Yes, but those sessions don't usually include the uncle, do they?" Mrs. Peterson's smile didn't reach her eyes. "People are beginning to talk, my dear. A woman in your position can't be too careful about appearances." "My position," Madeline repeated, her spine stiffening. "Well, at your age and with your established status in the community, it wouldn't do to appear desperate for male attention." The words stung precisely because they touched on Madeline's private fears. Was she being foolish? Reading too much into Preston's courtesy? "I appreciate your concern, Mrs. Peterson," she said with forced politeness. "But I assure you my relationship with Mr. Ingram is purely professional." "Of course, dear," Mrs. Peterson patted her arm. "I just thought you should know what people are saying. It would be tragic if your reputation as an educator were tarnished." As Mrs. Peterson glided away, Madeline stood frozen, her cheeks burning with humiliation. She was so absorbed in her thoughts that she didn't notice Preston's approach until he spoke. "Beautiful day for a walk, wouldn't you say, Miss Everett?" she startled, turning to find him standing nearby, hat in hand. He'd taken to attending church services with Billy, though he sat at the back and never participated in the hymns. "Mr. Ingram," she acknowledged stiffly, his brow furrowed at her formal tone. "Is something wrong?" "Not at all. I simply have preparations for tomorrow's lessons." "If you'll excuse me, Madeline," he said quietly, stopping her retreat. "I may be just a rough cattleman, but I can tell when something's amiss." "Was it something Mrs. Peterson said?" Madeline hesitated, then sighed. "It's nothing important, just the usual small-town gossip. About us." His directness surprised her. "Apparently our educational collaboration has become a topic of speculation," she admitted. Instead of appearing concerned, Preston's lips twitched with amusement. "And does that bother you?" "It shouldn't," she said, "but I've spent years building my reputation as an educator in this town. I wouldn't want that compromised by unfounded rumors." Preston's expression sobered. "I understand. Would you prefer we end our arrangement?" "No," she said quickly, surprising herself with her vehemence. "Billy's progress is too important to sacrifice for the sake of wagging tongues. Then perhaps we should give them something legitimate to talk about instead," Preston suggested, his eyes holding a challenge. "Would you do me the honor of accompanying me to dinner at the hotel restaurant this Saturday evening? Properly chaperoned by Billy, of course." Madeline's heart fluttered treacherously. "Mr. Ingram, are you asking me to court?" "I believe I am, Miss Everett," he replied, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Unless you find the notion objectionable, she should decline. She knew she should. Nothing would fuel the gossip more than actually courting Preston Ingram, and yet, "I would be delighted, Mr. Ingram," she heard herself say. His smile broadened. "Excellent. I'll call for you at 6. As he walked away, Madeline wondered what madness had possessed her to accept. She was too old for this sort of thing, too set in her ways, too independent. And yet, as she watched Preston lift Billy onto his horse before mounting himself, she couldn't bring herself to regret her decision. News of their dinner plans spread through Fort McDowell with predictable speed. By Monday afternoon, every one of Madeline's students seemed to be watching her with new interest, and Mrs. Whitley was beside herself with excitement. "Oh, my dear, I always said you just needed to wait for the right gentleman," she gushed as she helped Madeline select a dress for the occasion. "And Mr. Ingram is certainly a fine specimen. A bit older, of course, but that's perfectly suitable for a woman of your experience." Madeline winced at the backhanded compliment but held her tongue. She had more pressing concerns than Mrs. Whitley's clumsy encouragement. What if the dinner was a disaster? What if she had forgotten how to engage in courtship conversation? What if Preston was simply being kind out of gratitude for her help with Billy? Saturday arrived with alarming swiftness. Madeline spent the afternoon bathing and preparing with care she hadn't shown in years. She chose her best dress, a deep blue that brought out her eyes, and arranged her honey-brown hair in a style slightly less severe than her usual teaching coiffure. At precisely 6 o'clock, a knock came at her door. When she opened it, she found both Preston and Billy waiting, both dressed in their Sunday best. Preston's eyes widened appreciatively at the sight of her. "Miss Everett, you look beautiful," he said with simple sincerity that warmed her more than flowery compliments would have done. "Thank you, Mr. Ingram. You both look very handsome as well." Billy tugged at his collar uncomfortably. "Uncle Preston made me wash behind my ears twice." Madeline laughed, her nervousness easing. "A very thorough approach to cleanliness. I approve." The Fort McDowell Hotel Restaurant was the finest establishment in town, which wasn't saying much by city standards, but the tables were covered with clean white cloths, and the silverware gleamed in the lamplight. As Preston escorted her inside, Madeline was acutely aware of the stares and whispers that followed them. The maitre d' led them to a table by the window, the best in the house. Preston held out Madeline's chair with natural gallantry before seating Billy and himself. "I requested their finest table," Preston told her, "though I suspect any table would be improved by your presence." "You'll turn my head with such flattery, Mr. Ingram," she replied, pleased despite herself. "Good," he said simply. "It's about time someone did." Throughout the meal, Madeline found herself relaxing more than she had expected. Preston was an attentive host, drawing Billy into the conversation while ensuring Madeline's comfort. He told stories of his cattle drives that made her laugh and asked thoughtful questions about her life before Fort McDowell. "What brought you to Arizona Territory?" he asked as they enjoyed slices of apple pie. "Opportunity," she answered honestly. "After my parents died, there wasn't much left for me in Boston. Teaching positions for women were scarce and poorly paid in the East. When I saw the advertisement for a schoolteacher in Fort McDowell, it seemed like Providence." "Were you not afraid to come west alone?" "Terrified," she admitted. "But sometimes fear must be faced if one is to live rather than merely exist." Something like admiration flickered in his eyes. "A philosophy I share, though I've never articulated it so well." As the evening drew to a close, Preston suggested a short walk before returning to the boarding house. Billy, full of food and drowsy with contentment, walked ahead of them, occasionally stopping to examine interesting stones or insects. "I hope you've enjoyed this evening half as much as I have," Preston said as they strolled beneath a canopy of stars. I've enjoyed it entirely, Madeline replied. Though I suspect we've provided the town with gossip for at least a week. Preston chuckled. Let them talk. I've never much cared for others' opinions of my business. A luxury few women can afford, she pointed out. He nodded thoughtfully. True enough. Does it bother you greatly? Madeline considered this. It used to, but I find that with each passing year I care less about conforming to expectations that were never designed with my happiness in mind. A dangerous perspective, he teased. Next you'll be suggesting women should have the vote. And why shouldn't we? She challenged, only half in jest. Instead of dismissing her, Preston seemed to genuinely consider the question. No reason I can think of. You're certainly more informed and thoughtful than many men I've known with voting rights. His response surprised and pleased her. You're either very progressive in your thinking, Mr. Ingram, or very skilled at saying what a woman wishes to hear. I've never had much skill at deception, he replied. Ask anyone who's played cards with me. My face reveals all. They had reached the boarding house. Billy, yawning widely, said goodnight and headed inside after Preston told him he'd be up shortly. Alone on the porch, Madeline suddenly felt shy again. Thank you for a lovely evening, she said formally. Madeline, Preston said, his voice low and serious. May I call on you again? Properly, as a suitor, her heart skipped. Are you certain? I'm not, that is, most men prefer younger women for courting. In the lamplight from the boarding house windows, she could see his expression clearly puzzled and then understanding. Madeline, you think your age matters to me. Shouldn't it? I'm 35, Preston. Well past the age most consider suitable for marriage. He stepped closer, his gaze intent. And I'm 42. Neither of us is in the first bloom of youth, thank God. I've no interest in courting a girl barely out of the schoolroom. I want a woman who knows her own mind, who's lived enough to understand what matters. His words loosened something tight in her chest. And you think I'm such a woman? I know you are, he said simply. So I'll ask again. May I court you, Madeline Everett? She took a deep breath. Yes, Preston Ingram, you may. His smile was like sunrise breaking across the desert. Good. Then I'll bid you good night until tomorrow. He hesitated, then leaned forward and placed a gentle kiss on her cheek, his lips warm against her skin. Sleep well, Madeline. As she watched him enter the boarding house, Madeline touched her cheek, wondering if she had just made the wisest decision of her life or embarked on a path to heartbreak. Either way, she couldn't bring herself to regret it. The following weeks brought a transformation to Madeline's life. Preston began courting her with a dedication and openness that silenced even the most determined gossips. He brought flowers to her classroom, escorted her to church each Sunday, and took both her and Billy on picnics by the river when weather permitted. Billy, for his part, seemed delighted by the arrangement. His reading improved steadily under their combined tutelage, and he began to share his hopes and fears with Madeline as naturally as he did with his uncle. You think you'll marry Uncle Preston? He asked one afternoon as they waited for Preston to finish business at the general store. Madeline nearly choked on her lemonade. That's a very direct question, Billy. The boy shrugged. Uncle Preston says it's better to ask directly than wonder forever. Your uncle is a wise man, she conceded, but marriage is a serious matter that adults need time to consider carefully. But you like him, don't you? And he likes you, he told me so. Warmth spread through her chest. Did he now? Said you were the finest woman he'd ever known, Billy reported matter-of-factly. Said a man would be lucky to have such a partner through life's trials. Before Madeline could formulate a response to this revelation, Preston emerged from the store, his arms laden with packages. The look he gave her was questioning, as if he could sense the subject of their conversation. Have you been entertaining Miss Everett with tall tales, Billy? He asked. No, sir. Billy replied innocently. "Just talking about the future." Preston's eyebrows rose, but he didn't press the matter. "Well then, shall we head home? I believe Mrs. Whitley is expecting Madeline back for dinner." As they walked, Preston's hand occasionally brushed against hers, sending tingles up her arm. Such casual contact would have been unthinkable just months ago, but now felt natural, almost necessary. At the boarding house, Preston helped Billy carry their purchases to their rooms while Madeline went to freshen up before dinner. As she removed her hat and smoothed her hair, she caught her reflection in the small mirror above her dresser. The face that looked back at her was familiar but somehow changed. The lines at the corners of her eyes seemed less like marks of age and more like evidence of laughter. Her cheeks held a healthy flush, and her eyes sparkled with a vitality she hadn't seen in years. Was this what happiness looked like? She hardly recognized herself. A soft knock at her door interrupted her musings. "Madeline, may I have a word before dinner?" Preston's voice came through the wood. She opened the door to find him standing in the hallway, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "Is everything all right?" she asked. "More than all right," he said. "I've had some news. The cattle I purchased will arrive next week, and I need to prepare the ranch to receive them." "That's wonderful," she said, genuinely pleased for him. "Your plans are coming together." "They are," he agreed, "but I find myself impatient with other plans as well." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. "I had intended to wait, to court you properly for months as tradition dictates." But Billy's question this afternoon made me realize that, at our age, perhaps we've waited long enough for happiness. Madeline's heart began to race as Preston opened the box to reveal a simple but elegant gold ring set with a small diamond. "Madeline Everett, I find myself in love with you. Your intelligence, your compassion, your strength of character, everything about you calls to me like nothing ever has. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" For a moment, Madeline couldn't speak. Joy and disbelief warred within her. This couldn't be happening, not to her, not at her age, not after years of resignation to spinsterhood. Preston waited, his expression growing uncertain as her silence lengthened. "I understand if you need time to consider." "Yes," she interrupted, finding her voice at last. "Yes, Preston, I'll marry you." The tension left his face, replaced by such happiness that it nearly took her breath away. He slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, and then, with a questioning glance that she answered with a nod, he leaned forward and kissed her. Unlike the chaste peck on her cheek from weeks before, this kiss held promise and passion. His lips were warm and firm against hers, his hand gentle at her waist, and Madeline felt herself melt into him as if they had been made to fit together. When they parted, both slightly breathless, Preston rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since the first day I saw you in that schoolhouse," he confessed. "I'm glad you waited until now," she said with a smile. "It would have scandalized my students." His laugh rumbled through his chest. "We should tell Billy. He'll be overjoyed." As they made their way to Preston's room where Billy was organizing their purchases, Madeline felt as if she were walking in a dream. Just months ago, she had resigned herself to a life alone, convinced that her chance for marriage and family had passed. Now, she was engaged to a man who valued her exactly as she was, who saw her age as an asset rather than a liability. Billy's reaction to their news was everything they could have hoped for. The boy whooped with delight and threw his arms around both of them. "Does this mean Miss Everett will live with us at the ranch?" he asked eagerly. "Indeed it does," Preston confirmed. "She'll be your Aunt Madeline." "And you'll still help me with my rating?" Billy pressed. "Of course," Madeline assured him, "though perhaps we'll set up a proper schoolroom at the ranch for your lessons." The boy's face lit up. Can we have a blackboard and maps like in the town school? We can have whatever you need, Preston promised. Now, why don't you run down and tell Mrs. Whitley we'll be late for dinner? I expect she'll want to hear our news anyway. After Billy dashed off, Preston took Madeline's hands in his. Are you truly happy with this, Madeline? It won't be an easy life on the ranch, not like the comforts of town. I've never sought an easy life, she replied honestly. Only a meaningful one. With you and Billy, I believe I'll find that meaning. The news of their engagement spread through Fort McDowell like wildfire. Reactions were mixed, genuine congratulations from those who knew Madeline well, barely concealed surprise from others, and thinly veiled disapproval from a few, like Mrs. Peterson. My goodness, the banker's wife commented after church that Sunday, eyeing Madeline's ring. How unexpected. I suppose at your age, one must take whatever opportunities arise. Before Madeline could respond, Preston appeared at her side, his hand warm at the small of her back. We consider ourselves fortunate beyond measure, he said pleasantly but firmly. Madeline could have had her pick of suitors at any age. I'm simply grateful she chose me. Mrs. Peterson's mouth tightened, but she managed a stiff nod before moving away. You didn't need to defend me, Madeline murmured, though she was touched by his intervention. I wasn't defending you, Preston replied. I was stating facts. You're a remarkable woman, Madeline, and I won't have anyone implying you're settling or that I'm some sort of consolation prize for your age. His vehemence surprised and moved her. Thank you, she said simply. The weeks leading up to their wedding were a whirlwind of activity. Preston's cattle arrived from Texas, requiring all his attention at the ranch. The house needed substantial repairs to be ready for Madeline's arrival. And the school year was drawing to a close, meaning Madeline had examinations to prepare and conduct. They decided on a June wedding, after classes ended, but before the worst heat of summer descended on the territory. It would be a simple ceremony at the church, followed by a celebration at the newly renovated ranch. As the day approached, Madeline found herself increasingly nervous. Not about marrying Preston on that front, she had no doubts. Rather, she worried about the physical aspects of marriage. At 35, never having been intimate with a man, she feared she would disappoint her experienced husband. The night before the wedding, as she packed the last of her belongings from the boarding house room that had been her home for so many years, Mrs. Whitley came to say goodbye. I've brought you a little something, the landlady said, handing over a small package tied with blue ribbon. For tomorrow night. Curious, Madeline unwrapped it to find a delicate white nightgown of fine cotton, embroidered with tiny flowers along the neckline. It's beautiful, she said, genuinely touched by the gift. Thank you, Mrs. Whitley. The older woman patted her hand. Now, I know you're a modern, educated woman, but I wonder if you might appreciate a bit of motherly advice about the marital bed. Madeline felt her cheeks heat. That is. No need to be embarrassed, dear, Mrs. Whitley said kindly. It's perfectly natural to have questions, especially given your circumstances. Swallowing her pride, Madeline nodded. I would be grateful for your guidance. What followed was a surprisingly frank and practical discussion that left Madeline feeling both more informed and less anxious. Mrs. Whitley, for all her gossipy tendencies, proved a compassionate and sensible advisor. The most important thing, the landlady concluded, is honest communication between husband and wife. A good man like your Preston will be patient and considerate. Thank you, Madeline said sincerely. For everything, Mrs. Whitley. You've been more than a landlady to me all these years. The older woman's eyes grew misty. I'll miss you terribly, my dear, but I couldn't be happier for your good fortune. You deserve this happiness. The wedding day dawned clear and bright, the June sky a perfect Arizona blue. Madeline dressed in her new gown of ivory silk, modest but elegant, with a high collar and long sleeves that suited her perfectly. With no family present, Madeline had asked Mrs. Whitley to stand with her, while Billy would stand beside his uncle. The church was filled with townspeople and ranch hands, curious to witness the union of the schoolteacher and the cattleman. As Madeline walked down the aisle alone, her eyes fixed on Preston waiting at the altar, she felt a surety that transcended her years of doubt. This was right. This was meant to be. His face as he watched her approach told her everything she needed to know. Wonder, admiration, and love shone in his eyes. The ceremony was brief but meaningful. When Preston spoke his vows, his voice rang clear and confident through the church. When it was Madeline's turn, she was surprised to find her own voice equally strong. There were no tremors, no hesitations, only certainty. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the minister declared. "You may kiss your bride." Preston's kiss was tender but thorough, drawing a few chuckles from the congregation. When they turned to face their friends and neighbors as Mr. and Mrs. Ingram, Madeline felt a joy so complete it brought tears to her eyes. The celebration at the ranch lasted well into the evening. Preston had transformed the property, repairing the old Thompson house and adding a wide porch that now hosted tables laden with food and drink. Lanterns hung from trees, casting golden light as twilight descended. Madeline moved among their guests, accepting congratulations and well wishes, her hand rarely leaving Preston's. Even Mrs. Peterson seemed to have softened, offering sincere-seeming congratulations. "Your home is lovely," the banker's wife commented, looking around the ranch house with approving eyes. "Mr. Ingram has done wonders with the old place." "We've only just begun," Madeline replied. "There's much still to do, but it's a labor of love." Mrs. Peterson's expression turned wistful. "I married very young, you know. Sometimes I wonder if I might have appreciated it more had I waited, known my own mind better." The admission surprised Madeline. "Perhaps each of us must find our path in our own time," she suggested. "Perhaps," Mrs. Peterson agreed. "In any case, I wish you both great happiness." As the last guests departed and Billy retired to his room, with strict instructions from Preston to sleep, not read adventure novels until dawn, Madeline found herself alone with her husband for the first time. "Well, Mrs. Ingram," Preston said, his voice low and intimate as he drew her into his arms. "How does it feel to be a married woman?" "Wonderful," she answered honestly, though still somewhat unbelievable. He brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch sending shivers down her spine. "I've prepared our room," he said. "Would you like to see it?" Madeline nodded, sudden nervousness fluttering in her stomach despite Mrs. Whitley's reassurances. Preston led her upstairs to the master bedroom, which he had furnished with a new brass bed, a dressing table that looked antique and well-crafted, and curtains that matched the quilt on the bed. "It's beautiful," she breathed, taking in the evidence of his thoughtfulness. A vase of wildflowers sat on the bedside table, and candles cast a warm glow throughout the room. "I wanted it to be perfect for you," Preston said. "For us." He stood behind her, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "Madeline," he said softly, "I want you to know that nothing needs to happen tonight that you're not comfortable with. We have a lifetime ahead of us." His consideration brought fresh tears to her eyes. She turned to face him, reaching up to touch his weathered cheek. "I'm not afraid," she told him. "Not with you." What followed was a night of tenderness and discovery that put all of Madeline's fears to rest. Preston proved as patient and attentive a lover as he was a suitor, guiding her through her first experience of physical love with gentle hands and murmured encouragements. In his arms, Madeline's age seemed irrelevant. She felt neither too old nor inexperienced, but precisely where and who she was meant to be. Their bodies found a rhythm as natural as their conversations had always been, and when they finally lay spent and satisfied in each other's embrace, Madeline knew a contentment she had never imagined possible. "I love you," Preston whispered against her hair. "I think I've loved you since that first day in the schoolhouse." "And I love you," she replied, marveling at how easily the words came now. "Thank you for seeing me, truly seeing me when others looked past." He propped himself up on one elbow, his expression serious in the candlelight. "Do you know what I saw that first day? A woman of substance, intelligence in your eyes, compassion in your manner with the children, and a quiet dignity that spoke of inner strength. Your age was the least interesting thing about you, Madeline." She smiled, reaching up to trace the lines at the corners of his eyes. "And here I thought you might be charmed by my youthful bloom." He laughed, capturing her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. "I prefer the full flower to the bud, my love. Always have." The first year of their marriage brought challenges and joys in equal measure. Building a successful cattle ranch was hard work, and Madeline found herself learning skills she'd never anticipated needing, from basic veterinary care to managing ranch hands with the same firm but fair approach she'd used with students. Billy thrived under their care, growing inches seemingly overnight and developing confidence in both his academic abilities and ranch skills. Preston had built the promised schoolroom off the main house, where Madeline continued Billy's education and eventually welcomed the children of their ranch hands as well. By their first anniversary, the Ingram Ranch was becoming known throughout the territory for its quality cattle and fair business practices. Preston's innovative approaches to breeding and land management drew attention from other ranchers, and Madeline found her educational background unexpectedly useful in keeping the ranch's records and corresponding with buyers. "We make quite the team," Preston observed one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sun set over their land. "Though I never imagined my schoolteacher wife would become such a shrewd cattle woman. Nor did I imagine my cowboy husband would develop such an interest in educational philosophy," Madeline countered with a smile, referring to the hours they spent discussing her teaching methods and the books on education Preston had begun ordering from back east. He took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "I have news," he said. "The bank approved our loan. We can purchase the Jenkins property to the north." "Preston, that's wonderful." The expansion would nearly double their grazing land, securing the ranch's future for years to come. "It means more work," he cautioned, "more responsibility." "We're not afraid of work," she reminded him, "and we're stronger together." His expression grew thoughtful. "There's something else I've been meaning to discuss with you, something important." The seriousness in his tone made her heart skip. "What is it?" "Billy came to me yesterday. He asked if he could call you mother." Tears sprang to Madeline's eyes. In the year she'd been married to Preston, she and Billy had grown close, but she had been careful not to overstep, always conscious of the boy's memories of his birth mother. "What did you tell him?" she asked softly. "I said he should ask you himself, that it was between the two of you." Preston squeezed her hand. "But I wanted you to know that I would be honored if you would consider formally adopting him, making him legally our son as he is already in our hearts." "Oh, Preston," Madeline whispered, overcome with emotion. At 36, she had never expected to become a mother in any capacity. Now this boy who had captured her heart stood on the threshold of becoming her son in truth. "Nothing would make me happier." When Billy approached her the next day, shy but determined, Madeline welcomed him with open arms. "I would be the proudest mother in Arizona territory," she told him, holding him close as he buried his face against her shoulder. That winter brought news that completed their family in an unexpected way. After several weeks of unexplained fatigue and morning illness, Madeline consulted the town doctor during a supply run to Fort McDowell. "Congratulations, Mrs. Ingram," Dr. Wilson said after his examination. "You're expecting a child due in early summer, I'd estimate." Madeline stared at him in disbelief. "That's not possible. I'm 36 years old," Dr. Wilson chuckled. "Difficult, perhaps, but certainly not impossible. Many women bear children well into their 40s, though it's less common." She left his office in a daze, her mind racing. A baby. Her own child. The possibility had never entered her calculations when she'd agreed to marry Preston, assuming her age precluded motherhood. When she told Preston that evening, after Billy had gone to bed, his reaction banished any lingering concerns she might have harbored. "A baby," he repeated, his voice full of wonder. "Our baby." He gathered her into his arms, his joy palpable. "Madeline, this is miraculous. Are you truly happy about this?" she asked, searching his face. "I know we hadn't planned. The best things in my life have been unplanned," he interrupted. "Finding you, raising Billy, now this child. God has blessed us beyond measure." As her pregnancy progressed, Madeline found the community's reaction markedly different from their response to her engagement. Women who had whispered about her desperate marriage now came bearing gifts and advice for the expectant mother. Even Mrs. Peterson hosted a gathering to celebrate the coming baby. "You've proven them all wrong," Mrs. Whitley observed during a visit to the ranch. "They said you were too old to be a bride, and now here you are, a wife, mother to Billy, and expecting a child of your own." Madeline smiled, her hand resting on her growing belly. "Perhaps they simply had the wrong measure of too old," she suggested. "Or perhaps age has less to do with readiness for love and family than they believed. Or perhaps, Mrs. Whitley said with a knowing smile, you simply needed to find a man wise enough to recognize your worth." The baby arrived on a perfect June morning, almost exactly 2 years after Madeline and Preston had exchanged their vows. After a difficult but ultimately successful labor, Madeline held their daughter in her arms, marveling at the tiny perfect features and the tuft of dark hair that promised to match her father's. "She's beautiful," Preston whispered, his voice thick with emotion as he sat beside them on the bed. "Just like her mother." "What shall we name her?" Madeline asked, looking up at her husband's awestruck face. "Hope," he suggested, "because she represents everything we hoped for but never expected to find." "Hope Ingram," Madeline tested the name. "It's perfect." Billy, allowed in to meet his sister, approached the bed with wide eyes. "She's so small," he marveled. "But she'll grow," Preston assured him, "and you'll be the best big brother a little girl could ask for." As Madeline looked at the 3 faces surrounding her, her husband, her son, her newborn daughter, she felt a completeness that defied description. From a spinster schoolteacher resigned to a solitary life, she had become the center of this family, loved and needed in ways she had once only dreamed of. "I never thought I'd have this," she confessed to Preston that night as they watched Hope sleep in her cradle beside their bed. "A husband who loves me, children, a home that's truly mine." Preston drew her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. "And I never thought I'd find a woman who would challenge my mind, warm my heart, and make each day an adventure," he replied. "We've both been blessed with second chances, Madeline." "Second chances," she echoed, "at the right time with the right people." As the years passed, the Ingram ranch prospered and grew. Billy, after completing his education with distinction thanks to Madeline's tutelage, chose to attend college in Denver, a decision his parents supported wholeheartedly. He returned with a degree in engineering and innovative ideas for improving the ranch's infrastructure. Hope grew into a spirited, intelligent girl with her father's blue eyes and her mother's love of learning. At 5, she declared her intention to become both a teacher and a rancher, like Mama and Papa. And when Madeline was 40, defying all expectations once again, she gave birth to a son they named Thomas, completing their family circle. On Madeline's 45th birthday, as she sat on the porch of the ranch house watching her children play in the yard under the watchful eye of their father, Mrs. Whitley, now retired, and a frequent visitor to the ranch, joined her with a cup of tea. "Do you ever think about how different your life might have been?" the former landlady asked. "If you'd remained Miss Everett, the town school teacher." Madeline considered the question, watching as Preston swung little Thomas onto his shoulders while Hope recited a poem she'd memorized for school. Billy, home from Denver for the summer, was sketching designs for a new irrigation system nearby. "I think my life unfolded exactly as it was meant to," she replied finally. "Had I married younger, I might never have known myself well enough to recognize true happiness when it found me." Mrs. Whitley nodded sagely. "There's wisdom in that. And look at all you've accomplished: a thriving ranch, 3 beautiful children, and still teaching at that school you've built here." It was true. The small schoolroom Preston had built for Billy had grown into a proper school serving the children of the Ingram Ranch and neighboring properties. Madeline taught 3 days a week, passing on her love of knowledge to a new generation. "I'm grateful every day," Madeline acknowledged. "For Preston, for our family, for this life we've built together." As if hearing his name, Preston looked up from his play with the children and caught her eye across the yard. Even after nearly a decade of marriage, the look they exchanged still held the warmth and intimacy of those early days. Later that evening, as they prepared for bed, Preston presented Madeline with a small velvet box. Inside was a gold locket, and when she opened it, she found miniature portraits of their children on one side and a daguerreotype of herself and Preston on the other, taken on their wedding day. "Happy birthday, my love," he said softly. "It's beautiful," she whispered, tears pricking her eyes. "Our whole life together, captured in this small space." Preston took the locket and fastened it around her neck, his fingers lingering against her skin. "Do you remember what I told you that day in town when you worried about being too old to be a bride?" Madeline smiled, covering his hand with her own. "You said I was just the right age for you." "The truest words I've ever spoken," he affirmed, drawing her into his embrace. "Every year with you has been a gift, Madeline. Every line on our faces, every gray hair, they're just marks of the life we've built together." As she rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, Madeline reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From a school teacher convinced her chance at love had passed to a wife and mother whose cup of happiness overflowed. The whispers of Fort McDowell had long since faded, replaced by the respect the Ingram family had earned through hard work and integrity. The woman once pitied for being too old to find a husband was now envied for the rich, full life she led. "I love you, Preston Ingram," she murmured, "more with each passing day." "And I love you, Madeline Ingram," he replied, his voice a rumble beneath her ear. "More than I ever thought possible." As they drifted to sleep in each other's arms, Madeline knew with absolute certainty that some things improved with age, wine, wisdom, and most especially, love.